Hi, welcome to the Big Book Project. I'm your host, Lori Feathers, and I'm really pleased today to have with me Professor James Elkins. James is in the Department of Art History, Theory, and Criticism at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. That's a long handle. Welcome, James.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, nice to be here.
We're really happy, or I'm really happy to talk to you about your new novel. And we're talking today, it's June 9th, and the novel will be released tomorrow, June 10th.
I,
And it
I
is
actually didn't
called,
know that
yes, yes.
because for some reason there's a later date posted somewhere. But that's nice to hear. Thank you.
Well, that's what my bookstore computer tells me. So we'll go with it. But the novel is a short introduction to Anneliese. And this is your second published novel that's part of a 5-book project called Five Strange Languages. And maybe you can explain the project to us and how a short introduction to Anneliese kind of fits in with it.
Yeah, maybe I can. it's it's hard to do it in a very short, in very briefly. So this was I've been working on this for 20 years, and it was up until maybe 5 years ago just a novel, and it started getting bigger and bigger. And I realized that because I'm not Proust and etc., I can't publish anything in more than one volume. It's never going to happen, and I can't publish a series of things. And so I split it into 5 books, and I worked really hard to make them independent of each other so that in case I actually happened to interest a publisher in one, you wouldn't need to know anything about the other 4. So I sent that to Chris Heiser at Unnamed Press, and he liked it. And he said, so we'll do this one. It happened to be number 3 in the sequence. And then about a year later, he said that he wanted to do all 5 of them. That's the reason why it's not easy to explain this, because then at that point I had to reintegrate them, but I couldn't change the one that was out called Weak in Comparison to Dreams that was out in 2023. I couldn't change it because it's out. I mean, I could do paperback. I'll do paperback emendations. But so I've been rewriting the other 4 so that eventually, if all 5 are published, they will actually read as one long single project, which is what they're intended to be to begin with. It's massively confusing, I must say, and I wish that there were models, and maybe someone else out there can point me to one, but 3 of them overlap in time. So this one, a short introduction to Anneliese, that's coming out tomorrow, is takes place at the same time as the one that came out last year, and so does Volume 1. So I have lots and lots of charts and graphs to try to keep this straight in my head. So that's the short that's the short version of what it is.
And I guess I'm not surprised that you've got lots of charts and graphs because Annalisa also has lots of charts and graphs for this big project that she's working on, which is, I guess, a history of life. And I think at one point she calls it something like the science of life made into a liberal art.
Yeah, yeah. So she's an out of work biologist, a Swiss biologist, who'd more or less been fired, and with some attendant lawsuits quite a while before the novel begins. And she's been working for 20 years in a room that her brother has given her in his house. And she's accumulated a room full of notebooks, hundreds and hundreds of notebooks with her theory of biology, which she's worried about because she has some reasons to believe that she hasn't always been perfectly sane, or at least she knows she's not been perfectly social. And so the idea of this novel is that she needs to convince someone to read it. And so the whole plot of the first half of it is her trying to convince this person, who is Samuel, who is the hero of the book that came out last year, um, that he should take a year of his life to read this, because she's calculated how long it will take him to read it. That's the first half of it.
And then there's also endnotes in the back of the book, and they are Samuel's endnotes, and they're very cleverly juxtaposed, I think, with things that Anneliese, or the ways in which she's presenting her logic and materials, because Samuel is a pianist and he is writing endnotes and providing musical stanzas about a real life composer, Karl Heinz Stockhausen. Um, I'm wondering what came first, your the inspiration for Annalisa, or your fascination with this composer?
What came before those? The first idea for this entire project was starting, way back 20 years ago. I'm interested in the possibility of writing about a span of time in a person's life, which is so long that they look into the past and they no longer think of their earlier self as themselves. It's a little hard to say because we don't usually think that way, but there's the middle-aged narrator, looks back to his distant childhood and can barely remember it. But in the footnotes, you have the same person who experienced these things that you've been reading about through the whole book, about the middle-aged narrator. But he's over 90 in the footnotes. So it's 40 years later, or as he likes to say, I think almost 2 generations later. And he's forgotten most of what happened to him, all the details, and many of the people that happened to him in his earlier life. So when he reads this manuscript, which he had lost, it went into the basement, and 40 years later he found it. And when he reads it, he nothing really comes back to him. So the wonderful flood of memories he's expecting, as in Proust, it doesn't happen. And this is not because he has senility. He's not no Alzheimer's or anything like that. It's not because of trauma. It's not because there's no origin story for it at all. It's just ordinary. It's meant to be ordinary aging over a very long period of time. This was my first idea for the entire project. I wanted to see if it was possible to write a plausible, sympathetic narrative about a life that's so long that it seems to divide. Because I think like the general idea of like like everything everybody has is your life is your own. You may forget a lot of things, but that was you in the photograph, and gosh, you were cute when you were 5 and that sort of thing. But you can remember the things that happened when you're 10 and so on. But what happens if that doesn't work, and your life just goes on long enough so that you become several people? So in the notes, what's happening is he's reading the manuscript, but he can't remember these details. Instead, everything comes back to him as melodies, as music, reminds him of music. And he realizes that it's the music that he's been playing on the piano. He realizes that over the last 40 years, living by himself for 40 years up until the age of 90 plus, um, that he's been playing pieces whose mood reminded him of people and places and events in his past, but he hasn't realized it. Now reading this, he realizes that's what it is. And so what the notes do is they try to retell the stories of the main parts of these novels as music. And there's sheet music in these notes, which you don't have to be able to read because it's described by the person, by the elderly narrator. But the narrator feels that this is a more precise kind of memory than words. So he's retelling the stories as music.
So is the music kind of prompting his memories, or is it something a little more complicated than that?
The music was he hadn't realized that he was choosing composers and pieces and things to play, because they put him in the same mood as people that he had known in his past. He didn't realize that until he had seen what his life was, and then he puts two and two together, and
Right.
then he feels that music has the virtue of helping you to feel the same way about people that you loved and places you loved, without the anxiety and without the details and without the stuff you didn't like. It's an exact portraiture, is the idea.
And how did you come to know and be interested in Stockhausen in particular, to be kind of the musical muse for Samuel?
Well, that's the connection with the fact that this is all about long, complicated manuscripts that's Anneliese has written, and the book itself, and all the rest of that. The connection is there because Stockhausen was a composer who, in the 50s anyway, had this tremendous kind of allergic reaction to all of previous music. He hated it all. He wanted to destroy it all. He wanted to remake it. So did several other composers of his generation. This was a mid 20th century thing, like pulverize the past and make it into something completely new. And in order to do that, he spent a long time trying to figure out how he could completely reconfigure pieces so that they would become every note is surprising and nothing is conventional, and therefore the pieces are really complex and often really long. So the Stockhausen pieces are long and complicated in the way that his life was, if I could put it that way.
And you obviously have a musical background that you can play this music. It looks, it's been a long time since I took piano lessons, but it looks very complicated to play.
Well, some of it I can't play, and some of it that no human except the ones that you pay to go see in orchestra hall could play these things. Other ones are really simple, but I thought about this for a long time because in the other novels, it's not just this one composer. There's a number of really simple composers in it too. But I really didn't want this to be something that where you had to be able to read music or play it. And so the narrator always describes what's on the page. So in a way, the printed music on the page is like a portrait. It's like they're like pictures, and you can read them even if you don't read music notation. You can see what the narrator is seeing in them, and hopefully see them maybe as a kind of a portraiture. So they're meant to work that way.
Well, I know as a professor of art history and theory and criticism, you've long been uh, exploring this question of using visual images in works of literature and just kind of, I guess, mashing up the disciplines in general. So in what ways do you think that is this is this project, the five novel, five strange languages project, is that a way to express this idea that you have in addition to the memory idea, I guess?
Yeah, well, this book, the short introduction to Anneliese, has only one photo in it, right? It's a frontispiece kind of thing, an emblem, um, which people on social media were trying to guess, but you can't guess what it is until you read it. But the other books, including the one that came out in 2023, have lots and lots of images, and the model for that, usually, like in literature, is Sebald. Most people think of Sebald and with his photographs, and um, when I have my academics hat on, I study Sebald and people like that, and I teach those kinds of things. The reason I got interested in that stuff is that in my field, like my day job is art history and criticism. In my field, I think we treat images in a really weird way because, on the one hand, we're all art historians and theorists and critics supposedly because we love art, and we all think we should, go see the originals and study them as closely as possible. But when we put them in our own professional publications, they are relegated to a very subservient role. They basically serve as evidence for our brilliant arguments. And there's even a kind of perversity to it sometimes because there are academic publications that choose black and white, not just because it's less expensive, but because you're not supposed to think that you're coming anywhere close to the amazing original visual art when you're behaving as a scholar. You're only just reminding people of what the stuff looks like. So in an art historical or in a scholarly publication that has like art in it, the artwork is never supposed to talk back. Now, there are people in my field who got very interested in this, and there's a whole field called visual studies where people like to try to let images speak and let them even interrupt their own arguments and let them have their own power and to have their own way of thinking. And there are books have been written about this, about the way that pictures think. But 99% of the time, they don't. They don't interrupt what the scholar is doing. So I got interested in seeing if I could get our graduate students interested in writing in a more open way, and I started teaching these classes, which include some of these experimentally minded academics, but then also people like Sebald who use images in completely unacademic ways, so that you're really paying attention to what the image is saying.
In addition, though, to the musical phrases and the photographs, and you're right, you there is just one photograph in a short introduction to Anneliese, and I thought it was interesting that it's kind of a photograph that I believe is based on someone else's memory, not Samuel's memory. But there are also other images like this one,
Yeah.
and these are super complex. I wasn't able to find my magnifying glass, but I'm assuming, and they do get smaller as they go. These are images of Annaliese's, I guess, 120 notebooks, and I don't know, maybe I guess more than that because there are black notebooks and there are gray notebooks, and um, but uh, tell us about these images, and do you have these scattered around your house somewhere, or like all of these cards or pages that are pasted up on some giant wall?
Yeah, I'm glad you held that up because yeah. So there's this other section. It's in some ways into the book when Samuel finally gets to read the notebooks, and when he opens them, you, the reader, turn the page and you see pages like these ones that you were holding up. So you're looking at Annalise's notebooks, and they do start out larger and they get smaller because I was trying to kind of conjure the fact that there's so many of them. The pages go on and on and on, but the first say 10 of those pages, there's like 20 or 25 pages in that insert. The first half of them or so are almost legible. So your magnifying glass wouldn't help you because I spent a long time making sure that no one could read them because they're just a little bit below the resolution of the page. But I wanted them to be as realistic as possible. And so this that took weeks and weeks of adjustments. Every one of those pages exists on my computer and is scanned from other sources. So the main source of that of those images is an Austrian novelist who is it basically wrote a huge number of pages herself. Well, she was 5,000 pages total. Her name is Mariana Fritz, and the last number of manuscripts that she wrote, she did on a typewriter, and they're all full of strike throughs and stuff like that. So I scanned those, and then I changed them around. And the other thing that you're seeing in those pages is images, like you showed, and the images are there's supposedly things in Annaliese's notebook, all of them, but some of them are actually in the other four books of this series. So they actually connect the different books of the series. And one of them, as you may have noticed, is the frontispiece to this book. So everything is connected, and it's meant to make readers ponder how that could have happened and who this person Annalisa is. But the root idea there was just I was trying my best to make it seem like these notebooks really exist. So I actually wrote out a 200-page table of contents, which you get excerpts of in this book, but I wrote the whole thing out so that it seemed more real to me. And you get excerpts, farther on in the novel about it because I was trying I was trying to avoid what you get in books like what's it, Elias Canetti's Auto da Fe, where this person has surrounded himself with books, and you never hear what's in any of the books, even though his whole life is books. So I wanted this one to really feel like there is actually an enormous book there.
Tell us a little bit about Annalisa. I love this character. She's she's rude and prickly and neurotic and really funny, I thought. I had a lot of fun with her. I I hope she's not actually really based on anyone that you might actually know.
No, no. I mean, well, the inspiration there and also the author that I think a lot of people try to get away from is Thomas Bernhard because he wrote these very cranky, idiosyncratic characters who go on and on for pages with lectures. And this it's effectively a monologue the whole first half of this book, and she really doesn't let Samuel get a word in edgewise for several hundred pages. He's not speaking more than one page worth of responses. I like the idea that I like the challenge of trying to write a really long monologue that's actually spoken, not thought, for example, like in Lucy Ellman's book, Duck's Newburyport, but actually spoken to someone. And I like the idea that the person who's doing the speaking is not just ecstatic like Molly Bloom or just fabulously always entertaining and full of information like Matthias Enard's people, and um, but who has problems, who's quirky and sometimes irritable, and so that voice seemed to me like an interesting challenge because there isn't anybody who isn't irritating if they go on too long. I mean, my dinner with Andre, I think, is like about as far as you could go in that direction. So yeah, it was kind of writerly challenge to do that with her.
Yeah. Um, so it won't surprise you to learn that my favorite part of the book is Anneliese's summer reading, chapter 7 of the book. And you and I have had exchanges for, I guess, about a year now about big books and what makes a big book worthwhile and some of the faults of long novels. And so tell us about kind of how you selected which books that you were going to have Annalisa read. And there's a whole category actually as well that she says are long insanity novels. And I'm wondering to what extent sometimes you felt like your Five Strange Languages was a long insanity novel.
Well, it is. I mean, it definitely is. I mean, I'm kind of always imagining a reader scratching their head, going, what in the world is going on here?" Because this book is as nuts as the narrator is. But so she's a biologist, and she's got a really, really long manuscript, and so she's interested in finding other long manuscripts to see how other people manage that sort of thing. And because she's a biologist, she doesn't think first of fiction. So the first thing she reads is what she normally reads, and that is encyclopedias. She tries to read encyclopedias. I have not read the 29 volumes of the 11th edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica, but I have, and a couple of other things that I'll maybe mention later. But I've read almost all of the things that she talks about in there. Um, and this is, by the way, I'd just like to say this distinguishes this project from Tessa Moshfe's My Year of Rest and Relaxation, because I saw recently on Substack she was asking some of her subscribers to please tell her about the films that her character in that novel does not watch because she hasn't watched them either. I thought that was hilarious. But anyway, so I have read all these except the encyclopedias and a couple of others. So she starts with them, and she finds that an encyclopedia goes mindlessly from A to Z. So she quickly moves on and she reads classics in her own field. So you have Darwin, who wrote at tremendous length, actually. Darwin's books are really long. And I even read his last book, which is about earthworms, which is not exactly a long book, but it's a really nutty book because he spent the last few years of his life studying earthworms and making his two sons help him study earthworms. And there's a passage in that which I think is like one of the looniest things that an English person ever wrote, where he's standing in his backyard, looking out over the rolling English countryside and wondering and thinking how wonderful it is to think that this entire beautifully undulating, picturesque English countryside has passed many times through the alimentary canals of worms, and that's why it's soft and rolling. So anyway, she encounters odd things to begin with, and then she just decides, after having read a number of these, especially Burton's Anatomy of Melancholy and a couple of other long ones, she decides that maybe the length of the book is a problem, and that maybe any book that goes on too long loses control of itself. So then she sets out to read books that are not only long, but also in particular, she sets out to read books that have been said by people to be crazy, so she could see if she sees herself in them. And I'll just give you one example of those. The Philip K. Dick's Exegesis, which is this 900-page excerpt from, I think it's a 2,000 pages worth of manuscripts that he wrote. When he had a couple of brief psychotic breaks in the 70s, and then he spent the last decade and some years of his life trying to figure out what had happened to him, and Exegesis is the record of that. And it's a really interesting book because he says, I look back at some of my books and I realize that they're true. I thought, at the time, I thought they were science fiction, but I realize now they're true. But then I look at others, different books of mine, and I realize they are science fiction, but I can't tell why. I don't know why. That's really nuts. I mean, it would be nuts enough just to say, okay, all my science fiction is true. That's a sort of garden variety kind of like delusion, but this is a more complex one. Anneliese reads a bunch of these books, and in the end, she comes to the conclusion, which is only a slight exaggeration of what I would like to, what I believe, what I'd like to defend, and that is that nobody really controls the form or the structure of a long book. And any book over a certain number of pages is going to lose the run of itself in some way. And Annalisa calls that insane because it's no longer following the structure that it was presenting itself as having.
Well, I hope that listeners will forgive me for getting off topic a little bit, but you know how fascinated I am by this subject. So, um, are you able to give us an example of what you think is a long novel that doesn't go off the rails, and maybe one that does? I think I know what you're going to say about about the one that does, but maybe one that you think succeeds, other than yours, of course.
That's I mean that caveat is that this book doesn't succeed in the way that it seems to at first. So I mean, it is an example of something going wrong. But I mean, this is a really interesting subject to me. And I know that your group with the reading long novels has it as there's point. There are a lot of points of intersection here, and we have talked in the past about Miss Mackintosh, My Darling, which is so that's a book I haven't read all the way through. So this is I don't want to try to speak about the entire book, but in my feeling and my understanding of it is that it's not a matter of structural complexity like it is with Musil's Man Without Qualities, where the structure of the book really falls apart, and it's unfinished anyway, forever unfinished. But it falls apart because he keeps interrupting himself and discoursing on various philosophic subjects. So it's not like that. The question with that book would be more like, what is the reason for the length? In other words, does it have a beginning, middle, and end, or is it some other kind of writing? I think of Duck's Newburyport as being is not a similar book, but it's in only in the sense that it seems to me not easy to say why it's exactly the length it is, a little over 1,000 pages, I guess, in that case. Really not easy to come up with a reason for that, except the mountain lion story finishes. So okay, but that's obviously like tacked on. That's it's interpolated, so it's not a structural reason. Um, so by way of saying that, I think that you and I have a similar fascination in the sense like these are two Venn diagrams, like our interests, and they intersect when it comes to things that are long. Long things have a certain fascination, and I guess from my perspective, I think the thing I'd probably want to say is that it's the fascination of the length is the question of control, which you naturally, as a reader, doubt more as the book goes on, and especially after 1,000 pages. But I'd love to hear what you think about that, because then you're the expert on Miss Mackintosh, My Darling, so that would be like to, know how you feel about it, having looked at it for so long.
No expert for sure. And if any listeners don't know, I've got a separate Substack that I've been working on for over a year now with some other writers. It's an epistolary kind of exchange about the reading. Um, I do think that works. And one of the things that I was thinking about, and I have been thinking about for a while, and we've even talked about this with um, works like Perec and other books, I kind of, and I guess this is the Venn diagram. I think a lot of maybe systems novels um, or experimental novels that have constraints or different types of forms or structures that they're trying to adhere to sometimes sacrifice emotional resonance for some of those things. And that to me is kind of a turnoff. I think Miss McIntosh, My Darling, although uh, Annalisa and perhaps you think that it's it's the repetitions are
What
careless.
do you mean, Anneliese, and perhaps me? Sorry, go ahead.
The repetitions are careless, and carelessness leads to boring prose.
Mm.
I think there's a real emotional resonance to that book. Like I can feel like, I don't know how to say it. Like I I I feel for the characters. I have an emotional attachment to them, where some other books don't. And I guess I'm not really answering your question, but I'm throwing it back to you maybe as table ping pong. But do you think that do you think there's truth to that hypothesis that sometimes if you're trying too hard to think about writing or art in an analytical manner, then you kind of take the juice out of it?
Yeah. Well, so Perec, as you know, I have this reading group. We're reading Perec's Life, a User's Manual, and which everyone is invited to join, by the way. This group is open. We are on chapter 5 out of 99 as of our meeting on Sunday. And in chapter 5, Perec, the author who has given himself hundreds of rules, hundreds of constraints, things that he has to mention, forms he has to follow, and so on, he only follows 24 out of, I think it's 42 of his own self imposed constraints in this chapter. So even at the very beginning of his project, he's completely cheating. So I that's one kind of source of like emotional interest because you're wondering about the author, thinking about them they become. But in terms of the characters in these novels, I think I would probably say that from my point of view, the emotion can actually be very strong when there are constraints. So I think the other side of this coin happens, for example. In visual arts, there's this visual artist named Mary Kelly. It's part of conceptual art movement, and she did a piece about her son called Postpartum Document. This is something that people who are interested in minimalism and so on study. And it was a massive installation with lots of text to read. And she kept track of her young son and everything that he was doing, and wrote everything down, his first babbly words and all the rest of that stuff. And seemed to some people very cold, but seems to other people because of the constraints under which she worked to be really, really expressive. So there's that. But just to come back to this question of the length of those books, with Duck's Newburyport, the one that I have read, um, that and the length of that book seems to me to be arbitrary in retrospect, because the stream of consciousness goes on at a pretty constant pace. It has a rhythm. The fact that, and so on. And it has repeated images and concerns. And so as a result, I perceive at the end, subtracting the mountain lion away from it, that the thing could have been 500 pages or 2,000 pages. I was thinking about that in my own book to try to figure out what to do about that. And I, I had two strategies. The first one was Anneliese gets, hopefully, more sympathetic as you go along because she gets more and more worried about her sanity. So you worry for her, hopefully. And the other thing is that she gets more and more demanding. She's at first Samuel thinks she's just ranting at random, and that it is like that kind of monologue, like in Lucy Ellmann's book. But then it turns out she's actually systematically introducing him to something. So as the system becomes apparent, gives it a structure, I hope. So these are my own kind of ways of thinking about that. And I wouldn't know since I haven't finished Marguerite Young's book. So if it could feel like one of those options or something like that in the end, or not.
And do you have or did you have uh, early on an idea of the length of the whole 5 novel project? Like what did you have a target? Like what you were hoping that would or that you could perceive would be the right length?
Well, it's as they say, it's found its length. People people say things like that when they realize they've lost control. but but it grew until I had to divide it, and then it was over 2,000 pages, and then it was less than 2,000 pages, and then it was around 2,000 pages, and over the last 5 or 6 years, it's pretty much stayed around 2,000. It seems to That seems to work. But I know when artists speak this way, it's really just a way of saying that they don't know. This is the manuscript, or it's like my characters come alive and they're doing the talking and I'm just following them, right? So I know that's not a great answer, but the length feels like it's getting done when it needs to.
Okay. There was a quote here from Anneliese, and uh, she's talking about again about big books, and she says this book digresses continually out of itself, opening rooms full of matters of fact into fields of narrative, and given the fields in return the shape of rooms. And then, which I think, by the way, the opening up onto itself and the rooms is such a good metaphor for a big book. And then she goes on to say, in this book, meaning her project in the notebooks, I sculpt the disordered, damaged, and imperfect life we all live into a form of order that is exactly as complex as itself. And is that kind of your mantra for this project?
Um, I never thought of that particular passage as being like a guide for this project. That the um, well, let me just say first about that what you were reading, that the reason why I was writing that way at that moment was that she's a scientist, and yet she's written something which is very almost fictional. It's very creative, to put it in that kind of like old-fashioned way. And I was trying to think, what would a scientist write if they were trying to potentially write to other scientists to get them to read something that's 51% literature and 49% science at the in the best case. My sister's a scientist, so I was thinking of this as how a scientist might try to write an introduction to a book that would never be taken as like normal science, something like that. Um, but it's not a. I don't think of it at the moment as a model for the whole project, the Five Strange Languages project. This Five Strange Languages thing is about a year of crisis in this person Samuel's life, and um, so volumes 1, 2, and 3 all take place at the same time. Crises come at him from different angles. Different things are happening to him all at once, and he's trying to um, compartmentalize. He's trying to exclude part from his mind. So when you read this Anneliese book, you don't hear about the other things that are happening at the same time, and things get worse and worse. So it's about a crisis that precipitated the end of his marriage, the end of his job, the end of that part of his life, and his 40 years that he spent by himself. So my model as a structure was how to keep showing the compression of his life and his mind as that year was progressing in stages, right? So that's five different languages are different ways of thinking about how his life is going wrong.
Yeah. Um, so back to this emotional resonance issue. I um, I was interested to learn, and you've published so many art books, but I didn't know until very recently that you had one called Painting and Tears.
Yeah.
And I have it on order, but it hasn't arrived yet. So I understand, though, that this is about the emotional experience that can happen to people when they're looking at a painting. And which seems so interesting to me, that you wrote that, and you're obviously so methodical about your very long tables of contents, and just to be able to, I think, imagine a character like Annalisa. Like, there's no way that I could imagine a character as organized as Annalisa, because my mind just doesn't work in an organized way, but yours obviously does, and I can tell that as well by some of the other things that I've read that you've shared online. So talk about that a little bit too, in terms of trying to describe people's emotions and what they feel when they experience art, whether it be literature or painting.
Yeah, I've written a couple things that are bad behavior as an art historian, when going off the ranch as an art historian, and that was one of those books. That was a book. Um, it was prompted by a grad student who came into a seminar that I had and confessed to the entire class that she had cried at an art exhibit across the street in the Art Institute here in Chicago. And this was an exhibit in which they had lowered the lights and had spotlights on the paintings, and they were romantic paintings. And so the other students thought she was like a little sappy for that, and she shouldn't have fallen for it. But this was a very hard-headed woman. She went on to get a PhD in the Czech Republic in art history and Czech Cubism, and so that got me thinking. So that book is all about the history of people who have had very strong emotional reactions in front of paintings, in particular, and I advertised in the TLS and a bunch of places. Have you ever cried in front of a painting? And I got hundreds and hundreds of letters. So this was not normal art history. This book, but the idea of that book was that there's this notion. I think maybe it's just a thing that academics think. I don't know, but there's this notion that if you have a really strong emotional reaction, it's not supposed to be part of your whatever you write as a scholar. It can certainly inform it, and everyone hopes, we all hope that we have these experiences that we feel very strongly anyway. But you're supposed to exclude it because if you cry, it's basically you that's doing the crying. If you laugh at a painting, like if you're looking at a painting of a Dutch tavern scene and someone's drunk and they're falling off a stool, then it's the painting that's funny. But if you cry, it's you. So this is a whole book about how it's not. It's something in the painting almost always that triggers that. So emotion is not something that's usually thought of as something historians should think about, because unless you work carefully, you're not historicizing it. It's just something that can happen to anybody at any time. So I've done a couple of things like that. I'm very interested in that form of empathy, which is not which is something that artists live with all the time, but scholars and academics and historians keep it at arm's length. With the Anneliese character, I was trying as much as an author does to inhabit that character and feel that desperation of a person who had been working by themselves for that long, um, and uh, it's not hard to do because social media, as we all know, is fun but really alienating if you're not careful, and that the etc. Um, that is, it really is all supposed to be about that fear, and then which then in turn provokes a kind of prickliness and irritability in her, and and at the same time a kind of solipsism, where she just, in order to survive, she has to stop herself from feeling anyone else. She has to just be doing what she's doing, her own self.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so tell us about the next book that will be coming out in the Five Strange Languages Project, and when we might see that.
The next book is going to be the first one, um, and um, and that one has a title that I'm very happy with. It's called Stories, like illnesses. And so in that one, Samuel is trying to find stories that fit his life. Um, is he the privileged white guy who has too much time on his hands? Is he, the kind of thing? Is he like the figure in Dante who falls asleep in a forest and wakes up and kind of thing, goes through a magic portal? And all the stories fail. They just make him sick. They're not good for him. They're not helping him because his life is not conforming to a story. So it's meant to set up the all five of them. And I will just say about the last one. The last one is a very short book. Should be maybe 60 pages, 70 pages, something like that. The volume 5. Um, and I'm actually very proud of this one. That book has nothing but obituaries in it. There's no narrative. There's no narrator. It's just obituaries of all the characters in all 4 of the preceding volumes, because everyone has died, including all the animals. So in the book that came out in
Oh,
2023 has plot having to do with zoos. There's a lot of animals in it, and there's also other their secondary characters and so on, they all get their life stories, even if they are like amoebas. They still get their life stories. So it's an imaginary cemetery. It's imaginary stories like that. Yeah, that one I think is it's a strong, and it's a very short book. The longer ones are the ones that are their problems.
Yeah. So, I don't want people to think that they should wait to read Week in Comparison to Dreams or A Short Introduction to Anneliese until this third one comes out, which you said is the first, because these really can be read, I believe, in any order,
That's right.
those three, and you because they're all taking place simultaneously during the same year, as you've
Yeah,
explained.
they're all completely independent. I was working to keep that the case. If you're reading really carefully, really slowly, and you're the kind of person who really it really bothers you if you can't remember every single character every single date, you will find lots of little clues that other things are going on, but they wouldn't bother, they won't bother a normal reader. So
Right, right. Well, James, congratulations on the book. I loved it, and although I have been harping on you about lack of emotional resonance in books that have a lot of structure to them, I loved the character of Annalisa. I just thought that as she was funny because she's so impossible. Like it would be very difficult to be this woman's friend or relative or anyone like that. But I still had a good deal of empathy for her. And I thought she was fascinating in addition to being really funny.
that's very nice. I feel like we should. I mean, it's always fun for authors to talk about their works, but I feel like with that we should do something like this again, where we're just talking about long books in general. I haven't had enough chance to talk to you about all the other long books that you're reading or other long books that I've been reading and the kinds of things that go into them. And also, really interested to continue our conversations about complexity in relation to length, because you can have a long book that's not complex, and you can have a complex book that's very short. But both of us, I think you and I are both drawn to things that are longer, and for me also especially things that break down, things that fail in structure and that are complex in that way. So the two of those together is like my formula.
I would love that. I think that would be so much fun. I know that we had the opportunity to have lunch together recently in Chicago, where you live and work, and we were talking about the aesthetics of resistance. And I couldn't help think about that novel in 3 volumes. The third volume just recently was translated by Peter Weiss, and when you were talking about some novels or art history books, I guess, or art books that contain the image, but the image is not really supposed to be, I guess, or the writer is not really supposed to be moved by the image. You're just describing the image, and I kind of love ekphrastic writing, and I think you've got a little bit of a different opinion of it, as if I'm understanding correctly from some of the things that I've read on your website.
About the Peter Weiss novel in particular, you mean?
Just yeah, or not about that one in particular, just but based on our conversation, but then also just how useful or how valuable ekphrastic description is in a novel.
Yeah, that's another huge subject that we can talk about. I'd love to do that sometime, because very few people actually kind of like interested in long novels, except that strange category of human who reads nothing but Proust, which we can talk about some other time.
You
People who
know,
just absolutely love him forever.
I admire the writing, but I've never gotten out of Swan's Way to get beyond.
as
It
well.
it
Yeah.
puts me to sleep. The part where uh, his
Yeah.
first swan's relationship with that first woman, I can't even remember her name now, like falls apart, and then she starts being nasty to him, but he's following her all around the town. Oh, I just thought it was pathetic. I couldn't really. I just
Well,
I just got irritated and bored. But maybe it's not because it's well, maybe it is because it's repetitive, like Anneliese. So you says that you get if something's too repetitive, it's careless and it leads to boredom. Maybe that's what I'm thinking about with Proust. I don't know.
well, and Annalisa, of course, reads Proust and has a little 5-page review of Proust in her Summer of Long Reading that you mentioned. And I mean, her objection is also partly mine objection, and that is that it's way too beautiful. It's so carefully done. It's so perfectly balanced. It's so impeccable. It's so unapproachably eloquent. It's so articulate in its multiple chained clauses and its perfectly balanced metaphors and so on. And Annalisa compares it to being dragged through a flowery garden with the smells of the roses in your nose and until you can't take it anymore. Just want rough edges, that kind of thing. So that's Annalisa's her source of annoyance anyway.
Well, in general, I probably wouldn't agree with that because I'm a huge Henry James fan.
Ah,
So, like, give me the Ambassadors or the Golden Bull or some of that late Henry James, and that would probably be too flowery, I guess, for Annalisa and too pretty.
I'd have to think about that.
Um, but yeah, it is really interesting to think about what it is that I really value in the really big books, and of course, digression is one. And then for the most part, I guess I don't mind repetition, but I think descriptive detail definitely has to be up there too. And maybe that's why I like the acrostic writing, or I guess what some people would call, some scholars would call something um, like presumed ekphrastic writing. Like I feel like in Miss Macintosh, My Darling, there's a lot of imagined ekphrastic writing. Like none of this stuff really happens or exists, but she's really gets into a lot of detail about the house and different objects. In the way she describes them, even though they're all made up.
Yeah. Well, these are all for separate conversations, I suppose, because they're all equally large subjects as far as I'm concerned. That whole question of when the opposite of that kind of thing, a long novel full of descriptions, would be someone like Jan Fosse, the Septology. Um, And in one of the two current London Review of Books, there's a piece by Adam Mars Jones, a double review in which one's a Japanese novel and the other one is by Richard, what's his name, Price, the guy who did The Wire. I got his name right. And Mars Jones is contrasting the two of them because one of them has no, as you would say, ekphrasis. The novel by the Japanese novelist is unaware of the city that it takes place in, uninterested in that. Lots of and politics is missing almost completely, and so on. And of course, with Price, or is it Prince or Price? Price. With him, it's tremendous detail, as everybody knows, like amazing detail about New York City. And
It's
that kind of distinction is really interesting because you can read Jan Fosse at great length and you don't miss, or it's possible to read it without missing the detailed descriptions.
Yeah, I love Fosse. I love the septology. I think that's a really brilliant book. Well, what we do know now is that we've got to make a date to come back together and just yammer about our favorite big books and our least favorite big books, and just talk about novels, and what about length of novels. Long length of novels really fascinates us. I would love that.
Absolutely, that'd be great.
All right, so we'll talk soon, and again, congratulations on the book.
Right. Thanks a million. It was fun. A lot of fun.